Joni Lamb about Marcus passing in public. However, she never mentioned that aspect of the tale. Behind the prayers and tributes that were broadcast on television, there is a portion that was overlooked. What actually happened during those final days? Why were some voices silenced? Why did those with knowledge claim that the truth was harder than it appeared? It goes beyond simply losing. At the core of this story is a side that could alter your entire understanding of it. When Marcus Lamb passed away in November 2021, Christians were taken aback. The awards and press reports were released in a flash. Daystar viewers were depressed, as if they had lost a close friend. Sad words were posted by pastors around the United States. People remarked on how much Marcus' strong faith meant to them and shared footage of him talking while listening to soothing music. Millions was more than a televangelist. Especially during COVID-19, he was a fighter who persisted while others gave up. He discussed contentious positions and raised issues that were not discussed by the majority of Christian leaders. He was a force in that sense, regardless of whether he was viewed as a menace or a hero. According to a government statement, COVID-19 related issues were the reason of his death. It appeared unexpected and abrupt. Despite their sadness, people went on and accepted it. Not everyone, though, was able to do that task so fast. Rumors started to discreetly circulate behind the scenes in the days and weeks following his passing. These were not rumors propagated by cybersouls or strangers. They were written by someone who has worked with Marcus or shared a room with him. These individuals were intimately familiar with Daystar's internal operations. "We summoned you back in so Dawn could speak with you at your mother's request. After we sign this, you have 24 hours to complete it. Tomorrow, that falls between 2:30 and 3 o'clock. Would you kindly sign that and return to Arnold's office? Until you are satisfied, read it several times. Next day, sign it. Basically, it's till 3 o'clock. You have a whole day to sign. Do that immediately, please. If you fail to do so, you will lose your position as vice president and be fired from the board. You're still employed. We are in that location." They remembered how tightly Marcus controlled everything. He was meticulous and cautious, and nothing occurred until he gave his approval. Every show, every guest, every topic, it all passed through him. This is why those who knew him well didn't understand how things proceeded following his death. Following the funeral, there were remarks on TV and the radio. Then, it appeared as though Daystar's entire course had changed. Suddenly, Marcus was moving forward with the tasks he had placed on hold. Internal conversations took on a new tone. In the center of it all was Joni. People whispered, did Marcus know something was going to happen? Even while his voice was still audible on broadcasts, other employees claimed that they hadn't seen him in the studio in weeks prior to his passing. Others observed Joni's apparent calmness, not fear or sadness, just concentration. Then the most important question arose: was Joni prepared for this before it had occurred? These were simply observations from people who loved Marcus and the ministry, they weren't accusations. However, they couldn't get rid of the uneasy sensation they had. Quiet uncertainty gradually replaced what had started out as quiet mourning, and the more time passed, the louder those doubts grew. Unnoticed at first, but impossible to ignore once it reached the proper individuals, the whispered rumor moved through Daystar's hallways like smoke. Most people didn't believe it at first. They believed it to be Joni Lamb's private journal or diary, and they felt it was too intrusive and intimate to discuss. Then, however, many who had worked closely with the Lamb family began to agree, it was real. Pieces of it, but not the entire thing, not in public. Scanning and photocopying. A select few of dependable employees, old acquaintances, and former insiders exchanged pages in private. Nobody wanted to be the one to make them public, and nobody would reveal how they obtained them. However, everything changed when the information contained in those pages began to circulate. Marcus did not own the diary. People recognized Joni as the faithful widow, who had supported her husband for decades, smiled for the cameras, joined viewers in prayer, and contributed to the creation of one of the largest Christian networks globally. The tone of those private entries startled everyone who read them, since that was how others perceived her. Technically speaking, you were no longer with us, so we had to pass a motion to do that. You had taken it out previously. I was fired by you. Because you didn't do it, that is. In a technical sense, you left the board. The vice president wasn't fired by me. We approved a motion at her request to give you a day to consider it before receiving a letter from Daystar informing you of what transpired. Do you join me? You must therefore go home, pray, chat, or do anything else you want until 3 o'clock tomorrow. Then, you must return to Arnold's office and read that document until you are either ready to sign it or not. We're all obligated by it if you sign it, but if you don't, you've been kicked from the board and Daystar officer status. It would have been up to her to decide whether or not to remove herself. You did it, that's what occurred when you didn't sign it. Hey, he's claiming that you weren't kicked off this board. What made the entries so unnerving was that they were calm and detached. Some even referred to them as cold, rather than passionate or angry. Even while Joni never called Marcus out by name, her remarks made it quite evident that she was emotionally absent, the kind that develops gradually over time rather than all at once. Line by line, the pages depict stillness, separation, and absence instead of arguments or betrayals, a waning bond between two individuals who once stood side by side on the world's largest religious stages. There were certain sentences that people remembered, but there wasn't a startling admission or complete deception. One reader recalled and wrote, "He's not listening anymore. Not to me or anybody else." Another claimed Joni characterized their home life as quiet in all the wrong ways. Only a few days prior to Marcus's hospitalization, the most unsettling comment that inspired apprehension and uncertainty was penned. "Everything is coming into view now. I must keep silent," it whispered. "Let it occur. God is able to see." To someone outside the circle, that can sound innocuous, contemplative, or spiritual. However, it sounded different to others who were familiar with the entire tale, had witnessed the emotional strain in the household, and had watched Joni assume leadership roles unexpectedly fast. It sounded as though the woman had already crossed a boundary in her head and was aware of what would happen before it actually did. In a way that suggested she sensed Marcus' death coming on all levels, spiritually, emotionally, and legally. People began to talk and then inquire, was Joni already getting ready for Marcus' death? Although no one was certain, Marcus's diary gave it a spooky sense of certainty. During Marcus's lifetime, Joni appeared to have already moved on. Then came the court documents. Control over Daystar assets was established, property was transferred, and estate changes were filed in the days following Marcus's passing. According to those present, it seemed as though the plan had already been decided. Although many assumed Joni would take some time to grieve, she never concealed the fact that she would continue to lead Daystar. Rather, she redirected the network, convened meetings, and replaced employees. At that point, the diary became public knowledge instead than a private matter. It changed everything: how fast things changed, how Dr. Doug Weiss immediately attended meetings behind closed doors, and how, within days of the funeral, Joni's energy was used to transform the ministry. Joni has never verified the diary, to be clear. No complete copy has ever been released, and she has never reacted to the leaks, statements, or claims of having seen the entries. People's perceptions of Marcus' final months have been altered by these pages. People remember more than just being ill and praying during those months. They recall the tone of Joni's voice over the radio, the expression in her eyes, and the snap decisions. The fact that the entries weren't harsh made it even more difficult. No one who was planning anything wrote them. They were written by someone who thought her role had changed, was worn out, and had resigned. She now viewed herself as someone waiting for a storm to pass rather than as a partner. What Marcus knew was more important than what Joni wrote. Was the diary read by him? Had he sensed the emotional separation? Did he know what was happening to him? We may never know, but we do know that the diary showed a previously unknown side of Joni, not the co-host or the distraught widow, but the woman at the center of it all, the one with uncertainties, annoyances, and perhaps even a scheme. The diary ultimately became more than just a compilation of entries. It became a representation of all that had been concealed: the tension, the quiet, the choices taken behind closed doors, and its discovery was all the more eerie. The entries were never answered by Joni Lamb, who neither confirmed nor denied them. Because sometimes the truth whispers from the margins of a torn notebook page rather than screaming, people who witness them will never forget them. You won't be able to forget them once you hear them. Almost immediately after Marcus Lamb's passing, the atmosphere within Daystar shifted. From the outside, it appeared to be a period of grieving, complete with memorial services and thoughtful declarations of loss and faith. The days following his passing, however, were more like transition for those inside than sadness, since they were swift, calculated, and far more planned than anybody had anticipated. Nobody wanted to speak it out loud at first. Marcus's voice could still be heard in the studio from pre-recorded lectures, his images were still on the displays, and people were still thinking about him. However, something began to be noticed behind the scenes. Joni wasn't going to slow down. She wasn't sitting in a contemplative or meditative state. She was moving fast and deliberately. Her tone altered during talks. Viewers weren't accustomed to hearing the quiet voice during dinner events. It was more aggressive and incisive. There was little opportunity for doubt because she made judgments with greater clarity. Suddenly, Marcus was working on projects that he had put on hold because they were unimportant or required more time. Now, plans that had been stalled were being approved. Everyone was changing: budgets, people, and, most significantly, power. Longtime staff members, some of whom had been with Daystar for over a decade, were being quietly let go or transferred, while others were placed in different positions or prevented from making important choices. Joni was obviously now in command. Instead, the distraught widow whom everyone had assumed would remain hidden was taking center stage and wasn't turning around. A few employees attempted to solve the problem. She may be attempting to keep herself occupied, they suggested. Not only did the adjustments happen quickly, but she also appeared to have planned them out rather effectively. She made executive decisions, repositioned herself at the top of the company, and swiftly reorganized leadership. It felt like a rehearsed shift rather than a reaction. Then the new presence appeared. For many years, Dr. Doug Weiss was a well-known figure on Christian television. He was a well-known author and professional psychologist who specialized in relationship counseling, recovery, and inner healing. He was a recognized face because he had previously been on Daystar. Marcus's return was not well received by his coworkers. He was initially described as someone who would occasionally attend meetings and offer suggestions. People soon discovered, however, that he was not merely a visitor but was actively involved. He presented at executive decisions, advised on programming, and participated in strategy sessions. Additionally, a number of others observed how close he appeared to be to Joni, how frequently they spoke, and how much she trusted his counsel. It was too evident to ignore, but it wasn't overt or improper. It seemed like a strange time for those who had worked under Marcus. Only a month had passed after his passing, and Joni was already on the move with a new companion. Once more, no one advised her against grieving as she needed to, although this didn't seem like sadness. It appeared as though a new age was dawning, and it was not just about who was entering but also about who was being driven out. Marcus had assembled a group of devoted workers who shared his ideals, vision, and bravery. However, many of those voices were silenced following his death. Some departed willingly, stating that the ministry no longer felt like the one they had helped create, while others were quietly sacked and informed that their duties had changed. Staff members who expressed worries about Joni's new tone or the rapidity of the transformation were advised to pray for her, be compassionate, and trust her process. Behind closed doors, it didn't feel like Joni was grieving in her own way, despite what certain leaders claimed. Joni was planning, building, moving forward. Even modifications to the law happened quite fast. Leadership control, estate transfers, and ownership paperwork all proceeded swiftly and without incident. Some claimed that since Marcus had served as the network spokesperson for so long, someone had to take the lead. Others questioned whether such documents had been created in advance and how they could have been signed, sealed, and filed so quickly. This raised the same unanswered question: had Joni been preparing for Marcus's departure all along? People were concerned that she wouldn't be taken by surprise in terms of her spirituality, logistics, or emotions. According to one former colleague, it seemed as though she had the entire plan prepared and had mentally reviewed it before it occurred. That phrase caused them to reevaluate everything, which is why it stuck with them. These acts appeared much more alarming when viewed in the context of the purported diary entries. Everything is coming into view now. I just have to stay quiet, let it unfold, God sees. That now famous entry sounded more like a calculated acceptance than a poetic reflection. If Joni had emotionally checked out prior to Marcus's death, then Dr. Doug Weiss's abrupt ascent, the structure's rapid alterations, and the legal changes' rapid pace began to make unsettling sense. For many, Joni's new leadership did not begin with Marcus Lamb's passing. However, it was the final component in a change that had already started. Naturally, Joni never responded to the gossip. The timing was never explained by her. In public, she never discussed how Doug Weiss became her closest confidant. Furthermore, she never gave credit to those who quietly quit the ministry because they felt misled, offended, or deceived. In actuality, though, Daystar employees witnessed it. They experienced it firsthand. And no matter how polished the broadcasts or press releases appeared, the staff was unable to deny what they had witnessed, a swift, nearly heartless transition from silence to complete control, from mourning to government. This was a new, planned Daystar, not the one they were used to. It wasn't widely believed to have the same spiritual underpinnings. Rather, they believed it was founded on efficiency, appearance, and a mission that Joni might have secretly harbored long before the rest of the world did. Most people assumed they knew how the story would finish when Marcus Lamb passed away in late 2021. A famous preacher passes away unexpectedly, and his distraught wife, Joni Lamb, carries on his mission. The program continues, the mission continues, and fans continue to send flowers and kind messages. However, something more complex and chaotic was taking place behind the public personas and seamless transitions. And losing wasn't the only thing at stake. For many years, Marcus Lamb was the lifeblood of Daystar. He was renowned for his courage, enthusiasm, and refusal to back down from a fight. He voiced his opposition to what he seen as excessive government intervention during the COVID-19 pandemic. He challenged vaccine falsehoods and offered doctors a voice that the mainstream media would not. He got even more loyal supporters as a result. His audience viewed him as a Christian general who was unwavering, boisterous, arrogant, and steadfast in his purpose. People were so horrified to learn that he had passed away from difficulties related to COVID-19. How could this man, this seemingly invincible fighter, be gone? Emotions were high at the public memorial. The world was depressing, but Daystar was experiencing an odd phenomenon. Suddenly the atmosphere had shifted, and soon there were murmurs. These came from folks who knew the Lambs, had worked there, attended meetings, or prayed in the studio halls. They weren't from strangers. They posed questions they were hesitant to voice aloud, such as why Joni appeared so composed and prepared, as if she had prepared for this. Why were important employees being transferred so frequently? Why did it seem as though a strategy was already underway? The diary was the next item. It was not meant to be seen. Slowly, many close to the ministry became aware of a handwritten personal notebook believed to be Joni's. Although it was discussed in whispers and some of it was seen in private, it was never published nor leaked online. What they witnessed appeared to be emotional detachment rather than mourning. According to one, the tone was finished, not angry or hostile, but finished. The pages contained no startling charges. The fact that Joni and Marcus were emotionally mute and that it was obvious that something was amiss at home long before Marcus became ill were among the lines that caused anxiety even though there was no smoking gun. Everything is coming into view now. I need to keep quiet, according to an entry made just before Marcus left for the hospital. Let it occur. God is able to see. From the outside, that might have sounded like a period of reflection or spirituality, but to those who were aware of what was happening between the Lambs, it sounded more like someone who was anticipating the end and knew what was about to happen. Someone who had already moved on inside. That feeling grew stronger after Marcus's passing. Joni didn't go away or take a break. Instead, she immediately took over and began making decisions, setting up meetings, and rearranging the leadership. She was clear, self-assured, and focused on the future. She brought back projects that Marcus had put on hold and brought in new advisors like Dr. Doug Weiss. At first it looked like business, consulting, strategy, and moving forward.